Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Royal House and Slave Quarters. My name is Olivia, and I will be conducting our school tour today. We are right now in the Slave Quarters building, and this area in the downstairs part is where a lot of the work would have taken place. The upstairs part that we are not going to go to would have been where the enslaved people were sleeping. So we will spend the first part of our program here in this room. In the back of the room, you will see two doors. Those are the bathrooms, and anyone can use either one of the bathrooms. So what is going to happen for our time today? We're going to have an introduction here in the slave quarters. After the introduction, we are going to do an activity in here in the slave quarters. Then we're going to divide into groups and do tours of the property and tours of the house. We're going to come back here in this room. We are going to finish up the slideshow and end with what I hope would be a fun activity for everyone here. If there aren't any questions, then we can continue. Welcome to Ten Hills Farm. Ten Hills Farm is the name of the farm that John Winthrop had when he was governor of Massachusetts. Of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Isaac Royal purchased part of this farm and retained the name. And we're here in Medford, Massachusetts, and the time that we're talking about is 1758. As you can see by this map, that little A there you have up there shows you where Medford is. And you're coming from, and just say whatever town it is. You can look on the map and see if it's there, just to give people a general idea of where we are in relation to where they are coming from. The next slide here is also showing you that this is still part of the 13 colonies. We have not fought the American Revolution yet, so this is during the colonial period that we're talking about. And if you can see on this picture, it's a pretty strange looking triangle, kind of disjointed kind of triangle. But there are three distinct points of this triangle. And we're going to talk about a little bit about this triangle and the trade that was happening during this time period. And this is all trade that Isaac Royal is very much involved in. And these are some important dates that I would like you to remember. The Pilgrims arrive in 1620. It's also important to realize that in 1619, enslaved people were in Jamestown. So basically, enslaved people were in this country before the Pilgrims came. The first enslaved Africans arrive in Massachusetts in 1638. In 1641, slavery is made legal in Massachusetts. And in the year that we're talking about, 1/3 of all of the enslaved people in Medford are at the Royal House and Slave Quarters. Now, when I'm introducing this slide, I introduce line by line, and then I will start with the Pilgrims arrive, and then I will ask them, how many years do you think it was before the first enslaved Africans arrived? Then how many years do you think it took for slavery to become legal? Just kind of lead them in those questions. And the next slide is the parallel lives slide. The next slide is the parallel lives slide, which basically introduces the program, Life and Work in the Northern Plantation. Then the question is, what is enslavement? And then you can take questions or take answers, and basically whatever answers they give you, you can take. Then go through this definition of enslavement. It basically, you're focusing on the fact that it's a system, that it's a legal system, and that legal school system is forcing obedience, and it's also something where there is no pay. This next slide here is a slide, an overhead slide showing where the royal house is, giving you kind of an overhead view of the land of Medford during this time. You can see where General Royal's house is, and I just usually say here that they had 506 acres, and that Isaac Royal's plantation here on Ten Hills Farm is the same size as 10 Boston Commons, because Boston Common is typically 50 acres. Here is a picture of Mary and Elizabeth Royal, and in this particular program we're focusing on the children at the Royal House. So I start talking about Mary and Elizabeth, how they're 11 and 13. I usually start this off by saying, what do you see here, and tell me about this image. And they'll give answers and usually say they look really rich. And I said, do they look like they're playing out? I mean, they're out in the dirt working, and they'll always say no. And then I explain who they are. This is Mary and Elizabeth Royal. And Mary and Elizabeth Royal's grandfather, Isaac Royal, is the one who had the royal house built. Then the next image is Isaac Royal's crest. And I basically say, with this particular image, we don't know what Isaac Royal looked like. So we're using his family crest. He was born poor in born in Maine rather. And at 3, his family moved to Dorchester. His father was a carpenter. He did not want to be a carpenter. When he was able to leave, he did leave, and basically went to the sea as a merchant mariner. He married, and his wife died. Then he remarried a wealthy woman, and by the time he gets married to this other woman, he's in Antigua, and he set up this plantation. So he goes from rags to riches pretty quickly, and by the time he is in Antigua, he has probably at least 200 to 300 enslaved people. There have been estimates that it's been as many as 360, but we know that he had a sizable plantation in Antigua. And these next images are showing what life looks like in Antigua for enslaved people. So the first image is they're harvesting the sugar cane. After the harvesting, they are putting it through the machine where it squeezes out all of the juice. Then there's the boiling room. So that just shows you a little bit of the process. The facts about that could get pretty gruesome if you want to go into it. I've had students ask me in that picture, the first picture, with the sugarcane stalks when they're cutting it down. It's like, they have machetes, and why don't they just, cut the people and run away? And, so you get some interesting questions, but that just kind of, be prepared. Kids can come up with different things. This next image here is Isaac Royal Jr. and his wife, Mary and Elizabeth's parents. And so this shows you in one generation they've amassed a great deal of wealth. We have this portrait here of these two. And Isaac Royal, when he returns, Isaac Royal Sr., Isaac Royal Jr.'s father, when he returns to the royal house, he has the slave quarters built. And you can see how close the slave quarters is to the house. Also, notice on this next slide, there is a side view of the house, and you see different colored bricks. So the light colored bricks was the original farmhouse that was on this land, and all the dark colored bricks was the adding on to the royal house. So there were probably about 8 rooms added on. 2 of those rooms were basically for the use of the family. The family was only 4 people. So the other rooms were for work for the enslaved people. The kitchen chamber, which is basically the dressing room for the royals, and then rooms that were in the attic for sleeping, for work, all those kinds of things. There are two other children that were here in the slave quarters. And what can you tell me about this particular image? That's kind of how I present this image. It represents Joseph and Prime, which were two enslaved children, the children of Belinda. There were many children here and doing a number of things, and they're presented in the work environment. Joseph and Prime's mother name was Belinda, and Belinda more than likely was working in the kitchen or working in the house. Belinda had been enslaved by the royals for well over 50 years. And we're going to learn a little bit more about her as our story continues. Now that we have everything set up, we have Mary and Elizabeth, and we have Joseph and Prime, who are enslaved children. They're here in the royal house. Isaac Royal is here in 1737. He dies in 1739. And when he dies, an inventory is made of everything that he owns. And if you look at this particular sheet, it talks about some of the enslaved people that he owns. So this document, this inventory tells us a good deal about what was happening in the royal house, and what was happening, what was owned in each room. We can look through that document and surmise a number of things. But we're not relying only on that document, we're also relying on archaeology. So archaeologists from Boston University came over and conducted a dig here on the property. And that dig revealed a great number of artifacts. And at this particular time, we're going to spend looking at the artifact, looking at some of the artifacts in the room. So at this particular point with the artifacts, we're switching. There are sheets that are there that are basically two-sided sheets, or sometimes they're stapled together, where one is just basically a sheet where they're going to fill out information about an artifact. There are clipboards with some artifacts attached to them, and this is what the students are working with. So they will get pencil, they will get a clipboard with the picture of the artifact, and they will get this sheet of paper. The sheet of paper, like I said, it's either going to be double-sided or something stapled together. The top is the sheet that they're going to work on at this time. The back is for the game Achi that is done at the end of the school program. So what I have been doing that kind of helps a little bit, because there are only a couple of artifact cases and usually a lot of kids, I'll have them start on the activity and then call them maybe 2 rows at a time to look at the cases, and then they'll rotate and then go back to their seat. After this artifact activity is over, then you're going to stop everything. They're going to keep their book bags here in the slave quarters. They're going to keep the clipboard and pencils and everything in the slave quarters, and they are going to go into the house. Have the teachers divide them into groups. It's best to have, no more than 15 people in a group, but sometimes, depending on how many teachers you have, you have to kind of make your judgment. Rather, when I say teachers, I mean museum teachers. Then you go into the house, and also talk about the grounds, and go into the house, rotate into the rooms. Then you come back to the classroom after that and wrap up with a couple of slideshows. You talk about, with this image of the revolution, you talk about the fact that Isaac Royal Jr. at this time is not in Boston. He is in, he's not in Medford, he's in Boston. He gets caught on the other side of the enemy lines during the war. He is a loyalist, and he basically has to flee. So he flees to Nova Scotia, trying to wait things out. Tried to get to Antigua, couldn't get to Antigua, ended up going to England and dying of smallpox in England. So when that happens, things here get in a lot of upheaval. Belinda, who was Josephine Prime's mother, is basically said after Isaac Royal dies, he leaves in his will either she can be freed if she chooses, or she can stay with one of his daughters. And Belinda, of course, chooses freedom, and he awards her a little bit of money in his estate, from his estate, and she goes through that, and she realizes it's not enough, and she's an elderly woman. She's not really able to go out and work for herself, and she's taking care of Prine, who we believe is invalid daughter. And she basically writes a petition to the legislature to basically say, you have Isaac Royal's estate and you're settling those things. I have worked for him for 50 years. I was born in Africa. I was taken around the time that I was 12. I have memories of Africa. I have memories of the Middle Passage. I have been enslaved by the royals for 50 years, and I need financial resources from his estate because I helped to enrich him, and that some of that money from the estate is owed to me. So what does happen is she is awarded some money from the legislature. So this is a copy of her petition. And here we get to the end of our time together. And now we're going to play this game, Achi. And Achi is a game from West Africa. And what we're going to do is start with the board that you had before. And we're going to flip the paper over where you see Achi. So the first thing you're going to do is look at the slides while I show you basically how to make this board. The first thing you do is make a big X in the middle of that space. Next thing you do, you're going to put a line through it, up and down, and then you put a line across. So you have a big X and then a cross in the middle, like a plus sign and a time sign. When you're finished with that, you're going to enclose the whole thing in a box. We're going to give you some game pieces. Each person gets 4 game pieces. This is a game played with 2 people, and what you're doing is you're placing the pieces on the corners. You're placing the pieces on where the lines intersect. So that means on the corners, wherever it's intersecting. So you see the blue pieces, light blue and dark blue, representing the 4 pieces for the 2 players. Once everybody's pieces are on the board, if nobody has gotten 3 in a row, the pieces can be shifted around to get 3 in a row. And the slide basically shows you how that happens. And that's the end of the slideshow. So you basically thank them for coming. You would have found out if they were eating on property, usually on the porch, or if they're eating in a park.